Welcome to Sputnik, orbiting the world with me, George Galloway.
And me, Gayatri.
The Prison Officers Association has been warning for years that our jails, although some of them are no longer our jails, but private businesses, were a volcano waiting to erupt. Their warnings were not only ignored, but their rights were taken away from them by the John Major government and, despite promises to the contrary, not restored by Tony Blair or Gordon Brown.
What happened next is history already. The uprising in the G4S private prison in Birmingham last week may just be a taste of what's to come and what's gone wrong in Britain's prisons.
Joining us now is Steve Gillan, General Secretary of the union, the Prison Officers Association, so that we can tackle this subject. Steve, thanks for joining us. I mean, you are something of a seer, a clairvoyant, because many years ago I interviewed you on radio and you predicted exactly what's happening now. Why were the workers ignored by the government on this?
Yeah, well, firstly, George, thanks for inviting me on, and you're absolutely right. We did do an interview some time ago, I think it was about 2010, when the coalition government were embarking on their destruction of public services by imposing draconian budget cuts. And we warned at that time that if you keep doing that, then you will have eruptions on your hand within the prison system.
And that's exactly what's happened. An eruption is a good description of it. It is volcanic in character. Would it be fair to say that what you've got is too many prisoners, not enough of your members, the prison officers, and therefore no attempt really meaningfully to rehabilitate, to reform the individuals in the prison system? So it's just a pressure cooker.
That's in a nutshell, in effect, George. If you actually take it back to the Strangeways riots in the early 90s, Lord Woolf done a report into that, and he says if you haven't got enough staff and there's overcrowding, then it's a recipe for disaster. Now, Lord Woolf made a recommendation that said it should be written into statute that no prison should be overcrowded. And it was ignored by successive governments. It was ignored by the Conservatives. It was ignored by Labour. And they just kept cramming people in to our jails, but at the same time cutting staff numbers. Now, anybody with a bit of common sense would realise that that is absolutely a recipe for disaster. Now, roll on to pre-2010, we've got a situation where we've had different secretaries of state, with Kenneth Clarke wanting a rehabilitation revolution. We then had Chris Grayling, who failed miserably in the clamour by the right-wing media to lock him up and throw away the key and to get tough on individuals within prisons. So that was to satisfy the likes of the Sun and the Mail and all the right-wing media. Then we had Michael Gove, and now we've got Liz Truss. So the only thing that's actually...
It's all been downhill since Kenneth Clarke.
Well, absolutely, because the reality is, George, you know, we've sat and watched and we've warned them time and time again. And their own stats tell the story themselves. You know, record amounts of suicides in prisons, record amount of self-harm in prisons, record amount of drugs, assaults on staff, prisoner-on-prisoner assaults. You couldn't make this up. And they've got 8,000 less prison officers than we had in 2010 dealing with this crisis. You can only describe it as a crisis. And we've seen it at HMP Bedford, where there was a riot a few weeks back. And now we've seen HMP Birmingham.
So this is hell on earth within Britain, yeah? And many of them, I mean, I assume many of them will return into society. What existing rehabilitation program is that?
Well, the majority, you're absolutely right to mention that, because the majority of people in prisons will at some time be released back into society. It's only some that won't. So the reality is, So instead of warehousing people, what we should be doing is actually rehabilitating them and stop talking about it, give prison officers the tools to actually do the job. Yeah. And the reality is, I think we'll find a much safer society then when people are rehabilitated properly. But the truth of the matter is, much more has got to be done before individuals get into the criminal justice system. So, for example, you've got to deal with drug addicts. You've got to deal with alcohol abuse. This isn't rocket science. Most crimes are committed through alcohol or drugs. Mentally ill people should be diverted away from prison.
Yeah, and not mixed with the others.
Absolutely right. But we've got to get the basics into schools to educate our children, the right from wrong, and so forth. But more than that, you've got to give people hope of decent jobs, decent housing, decent education, so that you steer them away from the criminal justice system in the first place. Because once they're in that cycle, it seems to be a revolving door.
Absolutely. I mean, neither of us, because I know you, I can say that, are liberals. We're not fooled that all the people in prison are teddy bears if only we treated them nicely. So just in case anybody's in any doubt about this, the result of these cuts, a savage reduction of 8,000 fewer prison officers, is that territories inside the prisons become effectively under the control of gangs and criminals. By definition, they're criminals. They're in there. And if the guards are not there, can't be there because they're not in the numbers, the gangs take over. And therefore, you're getting prisons where drugs are being delivered and sold, often forced sales, to other prisoners. This is why your word hell is appropriate. So we're not asking people necessarily to buy our perspective of prison reform, penal reform, even from the point of view of the state's only most basic interests of keeping order in the prisons. This is a disaster.
It is a disaster because you just can't cope. I mean, you mentioned the drugs there, George. We've moved on to new psychoactive substances such as spice and black mamba.
I've never even heard of them.
Totally synthetic drugs that are devastating. Prisoners are dying from taking them because each batch is totally different. They used to be called legal highs. And there's nothing legal about them. It's destroying people's lives, not just in prisons, but in society as well. And our NHS is actually, they used to nickname some of the ambulances that were coming into prisons Mambulance, because there was that many prisoners who were taking black mamba being ferried to our NHS. It was clogging up every ambulance in the system in certain areas, which is quite frightening because these people who were taking them were turning into extreme violent people who may not have been violent in the first place. And some prisoners were using the weaker ones as guinea pigs to try and test the drugs out first to see what reactions they'd have. As you probably well know, drugs can be a currency in prisons. So what might cost £5 outside in the street will actually cost about £500 or even more, depending on the strength of the drug. So we've got real problems. But you wouldn't have that problem if they were running the drug treatment programs, they had the correct amount of staff to do the basics of the job. I mean, one of the chief inspectors reported that it was easier to get drugs than it was a clean pillowcase in a prison.
I've heard
now, if
that,
that's the sort of society that we've got, we should be ashamed of ourselves, quite frankly.
Steve, it's known that the Tories know the price of everything and the value of nothing, but they don't seem to know the price, even, of this. On the principle that a stitch in time saves 9, you'd think you could persuade them to employ a few thousand more prison officers and save tens of millions when prisons go up in smoke.
Well, that's absolutely correct. So you look at a situation where they've taken hundreds of £1 million out of the prison system, and then you look at HMP Birmingham, where that riot could run into millions of pounds. So they're not actually saving anything by having those draconian cuts, because you're right, you reap what you sow, and they're certainly reaping what they're sown now. And I can't see it getting any better. And that brings me to another point. When you pay people not the going rate, so for example, a new prison officer coming into the job is paid £19,000 a year. They are not going to stay in a violent environment because they can go elsewhere and get the same sort of money, or even more money for doing that. So they've got to put the professionalism back into the job. They've got to have a decent pension age. 68 retirement age for a prison officer is nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical. So you pointed out at the beginning of the programme that our union were banned from taking any form of industrial action, and it's actually illegal for a prison officer to induce another prison officer to take any form of action. Now that came in 1994 under the Conservative government, and you're right to say that Labour didn't repeal it under Blair or
Although
Brown.
they promised they would.
They did promise that they would, and they also promised that they wouldn't have any private prisons. Because I remember Jack Straw actually calling private prisons back in 1994-95 morally repugnant.
Indeed, morally repugnant. The only time for that last point. I know you've got members in both sectors, but most of the public watching this will think it is morally repugnant that a prison, instead of what it's supposed to be, can actually be a profit-making business for private individuals. And that's what we've got, 10% of Britain's prisons in private hands.
And it does make you wonder about reducing overcrowding and different things when you actually look at the private companies, their shareholders make money out of incarceration. And it brings me to a point that happened in America, in Mississippi, where judges were committing fraud, taking backhanders from private companies in America for locking up more and more children. And I think the judges actually received a prison sentence themselves, 3 years. Yeah, they went to jail. Now, is that what we want, a sort of system here, copying America? I don't think we'll get anything to learn from the Americans, actually.
No. We really don't, not on many things, and certainly not on prisons.
Absolutely.
Steve Gillan of the Prison Officers Association, thanks very much for
You're
coming
very welcome,
on board
George.
the Sputnik. Coming up after the break, he was a fine young cannibal indeed, Roland Gift. Don't miss it. Welcome back to Sputnik. He was a fine young cannibal indeed, the epitome of cool. Voted in 1990 by People magazine as one of the 50 most beautiful people in the world.
Iconic hits like She Drives Me Crazy and Good Thing rocked many a casbah, and then so far as most members of the public were concerned, he disappeared.
Except, of course, he didn't. Like all of us, he lived his life. But until I saw him in my audience at a recent talk I gave, I had no idea he was still performing. And wow, is he still performing? And I thought that a wider audience, young as well as old, deserved to hear what happened next. So I'm glad to welcome on board the Sputnik, Roland Gift. It was my Christmas gift to run into you because I was a huge fan of your voice. And I'm still a huge fan of your voice. But I lost track of you, and I suspect most of the people watching this also did. Your band was so big, and then, so far as most people were concerned, until the Jules Holland hook-up a few years ago, you were off the music scene. Did you consciously leave the music scene? Did it leave you? What happened?
I think it was a bit of both. We did have like really enormous success quite quickly as well. A lot of people said, you know, you have to tour America endlessly to have that, and we didn't. You know, we did 2 tours and then we had a really big album, and I think it was quite a big amount to process.
What age were you at the time?
About 28.
You weren't a teenager?
I wasn't, no, and I'd kind of had a bit of a life. I'd done all my drugs before then, so I didn't have to go through that.
Thank God for
I'd got that out of my system. But I hadn't had that kind of attention. And when we did our first album, we were based in Birmingham. I was living in London, but I'd commute up to Birmingham. We were based there. When we did the second album, we were based in London. And then we thought it'd be a good idea to go to New York to do the third album. But that didn't really work out so well. You know, it was quite a distracting place. And
Why, is it work ethics or what?
just everybody comes. I mean,
Because it is a place of where dreams come true, no? That's what they want to claim.
I think New York, is a great place if you've got your stuff and you want to take your stuff to market,
Yes.
or or to your public. But to actually sort of create, it wasn't such a great place. And
Too many distractions?
Too many just the energy of the
Too
place.
many people finding you the most beautiful man in the world?
It was exhausting just walking down the street to the shops, because people would just have, even not because people would know that you were famous, but just people had so much to say about themselves often as well. Just, they would kind of like unload on you in a kind of, their psychic energy would kind of unload on you.
Roland, my great-grandmother emigrated from New York to Dundee. Now, that is a perverse decision. But
Yeah.
your move to New York was kind of the beginning of the end of Fine Young Cannibals?
It kind of was. It kind of was. And we had this, we also had a strange experience as well, where we got robbed at gunpoint.
Oh, my God.
We rented this apartment on Broome and Broadway, and I used to go to these drama classes at Carnegie Hall, and I was doing some scene study with this girl called Deborah Joe on a Sunday, and we were just sort of chatting, and our first son was sort of lying on the floor, and I heard this sort of snivelling, the sound of snivelling coming down the hall, and I saw Louise, my wife, and she was sort of sobbing. And then this guy stepped out from behind her, and then he goes like that with his hand, and he shows his gun, and he says, "Get down on the floor." And then he says, "Not you, you get up, tie them up." So I'm looking for stuff to tie them up, so I rip out a phone wire, I tie them up, and then he takes me, and we go from room to room looking for shiny stuff. And all the time I'm kind of thinking, do I make a move, do I not? And then we go into the room where Deborah Joe's tied up, Louise is tied up. He gets Deborah Joe to tie my legs up. And he says, yeah, I'm going to kill you. Where's the rest of the stuff? And there's no more stuff. And then he disappears.
Did they find the perpetrator?
I don't know, because we had a couple of guys go around with us who were armed for the next period that we were there. Because I didn't know if the guy had recognised me, if he was part of a gang, if he was going to come back, steal the baby. We didn't know what was going on at all.
Acting was an interesting avenue down which you went. Not that many frontmen in bands have done that. Did you get a different kind of satisfaction from that?
I sort of started out doing drama, really.
Before music?
Before music. I mean, when I moved to London, I was thinking about going to drama school, but then you had to audition, and you had to pay for auditions, and you have to audition in more than one place. Whereas to do music, you just you're with 2 or 3 people, you say you're a group, and you are, because you say you are.
Yeah.
And then you can go out and do gigs much, it's more easy than to put on a production.
Of course.
So, yeah, although, I thought I'd do music and then go on to drama, it was kind of, music just sort of took off.
Yeah,
really.
well, you were stratospheric for a period. Your music was absolutely everywhere. I've just been playing She Drives Me Crazy in the car, and remembering that once upon a time, you know, I would sing that every day, every time it came on the radio. So you're back on the road. You've recently played London and Birmingham. What's next?
Well, we did sort of 3 Christmas shows, sort of 3 Christmas crackers, we called them. And each show we've recorded the show, not visually, just the music. Yeah. And that'll be for a live album. We'll see what we've got from the 3 shows. You know, we might be able to get one album just from one show, which would be great, but we can use bits of different shows. And that'll be for a live album next year.
Any idea when next year? I mean,
no, I mean,
put it in their diary. I tell you, I mean, you have been away a long time, but you haven't lost anything.
Thank you.
Having heard you now, you haven't lost anything at all.
Well,
so
yeah.
when can we buy it?
Yeah, in what format?
Well, vinyl. I think vinyl's very popular. I think people of my generation...
Definitely, it's got to be vinyl. I was going to say that to you.
Yeah.
Forget all this download stuff. That's very last year.
I think people want to have a thing.
They do. They totally do.
Yeah.
Roland Gift, thanks for coming on the Sputnik. And as a special Christmas gift from us on the Sputnik, we give you Roland Lee Gift and his friends. The song is I'm Not the Man I Used to Be, but trust me, he is.
When I'm in trouble or out of step, if my balance has been upset, or there's a feeling I can't accept, there's one thing helps me to forget. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking. But it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. If life were easy and didn't ask, didn't tease me or take things back, I could start to understand what makes me the man I am. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking. But it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. No, no, no. Such a shame. I can't explain why I'm not the man I used to be. I've lost days that won't come back. Memories fading fast. Now I should say the ones I have. What's the use when most of them are bad? Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder why I'm drinking. But it's plain to see I'm not the man I used to be. No, no, no. I'm not the man flame.
I'm not the man.
Well, I'm not the man I used to be. Don't know my name.
I'm not the man.
Do you know my name?
I'm not the man.
Can you help me, son?
I'm not the man.
Well, I'm not the man I used to be.
Just fantastic. You really are the man you used to be. And that is it, I'm afraid. And all that remains is for us, on behalf of Sputnik, to wish you a Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Happy Christmas.